All right, so let's dive back into the subject at hand. I wanted to bring up something that I had noticed across social media with a couple of people in politics, but we'll go back to Rep. Joe Wilson. So he had hold on, where's the oh, this is not the one that I wanted to bookmark. But anyway, he was trying to basically draw a line between the Moscow Patriarchate and the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And he made a post. I didn't bookmark the right one, but it said one is like the blesser of bombs, the other one was like the protector of peace, talking about the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So it seems like there's a bit of a divide and conquer tactic going on right now in the U.S. political system. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think he's trying to dig himself out of the hole because he started hearing from his constituents that are Orthodox and expressing their disapproval to what he had to say. He has a ROCOR parish in his district, but he has a couple of OCA parishes and I think at least one or two Greek parishes. And so he's trying to do damage control and say, I'm just talking about those bad ones over there. But the thing is, I wasn't aware of this, but ROCOR has no bishops that were born in Russia at this time. Our metropolitan was born and raised in Trenton, New Jersey, and so the idea of portraying ROCOR as this bastion of Kremlin assets is ridiculous. ROCOR was established because you had Russians that were fleeing the Soviet Union,
right?
And so it was established to provide a canonical framework for clergy and laity that wouldn't have a connection with the Moscow Patriarchate, not because ROCOR was condemning the Moscow Patriarchate, as some people would like to say, because ROCOR actually officially never did. Some people in it did, but the ROCOR never did. But because the Moscow Patriarchate was under the thumb of the Soviets, and obviously they didn't want to be in a situation where they couldn't trust the decisions that were being made by their leaders. And so Patriarch Tikhon actually, before he reposed, issued an ukaz or a decree that allowed for the establishment of independent ecclesiastical bodies during the Russian Civil War. And so that was the canonical basis for the establishment of ROCOR. And during the Cold War, ROCOR was, considered by the CIA to be essentially an asset of the CIA. I mean, I think our bishops didn't consider themselves to be such, but they felt perfectly okay with passing on any information that they had that they thought might be helpful. Anytime any of our clergy would visit the Soviet Union, when they would come back, the CIA would be anxious to hear anything they had to say about it. And what's interesting about Joe Wilson's initial post is he screenshot a e-message that was sent out by Father Victor Potapov in D.C., where he was encouraging people to participate in the Day of Action. And Father Victor Potapov, his whole career was working for the Voice of America and doing religious broadcasts that were transmitted by radio into the Soviet Union. And so to say he was some sort of a Kremlin asset is ridiculous.
Right.
After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, ROCOR waited how many years? Subtract 2007 from 1991. I mean, you're talking, a good bit of time passed. What was that? 16 years, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And because ROCOR was not anxious to reconcile with the Moscow Patriarchate until they were sure what they were dealing with, that the Soviet Union wasn't going to just come right back, and they would have already put themselves in a position where they would have to deal with that kind of stuff directly in terms of influence from the Soviet government. And it was looking at what happened in the Russian church after the collapse of the Soviet Union that eventually led to reconciliation, because the statutes of ROCOR always called for reconciliation with the mother church once Soviet persecution ceased. And But even still, we waited that amount of time before we reconciled with them, and it certainly was not totally uncontroversial within ROCOR. But we made the decision to go ahead and do it, and I haven't had any regrets, and I don't think most people in ROCOR have. One thing I would just point out, I was fortunate to know several people who knew St. John of Shanghai personally, and none of them were opposed to reconciling with the Moscow Patriarchate. And so I think that was a positive thing. Now, Patriarch Kirill has been criticized a lot since the Russian invasion, because he certainly has expressed support for what Russia has been doing. But one thing I would point out is there's not been a meeting of all the bishops of the Russian church since that time, just because the war has made getting all the bishops into a single meeting essentially impossible for the time being.
Right.
And so there is no official Russian position, Russian church position on the war. Patriarch Kirill has expressed his own opinions. But, about a year ago, I had some reporters from the BBC that interviewed me and a few other people, and they wound up doing sort of a hit piece kind of article. But they didn't play this or talk about what I told them in response to this question, but they basically were asking me, well, what do I think about Patriarch Kirill and the things that he said about the war?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's very rare that a bishop of a country has ever condemned their government when they were at war, and when their young people were at the front. And I pointed, because these people were both English, I said, the most despicable military action in modern history that I can think of is the Opium Wars. Mm-hmm. And did the Archbishop of Canterbury condemn that at the time? I don't think he did, because the parents of the young men that were fighting in that war probably wouldn't have appreciated them condemning a war where their kids were risking their lives, and many of whom were killed as a result of it.
Right. The shepherd of their souls coming out and saying, hey, your kids are basically fighting an unjust war and are out there sinning right now and might die in their sins.
Right.
It's maybe not a great statement to make for the families that you're shepherding.
But as I said, Metropolitan Onufry did condemn the war, and he supported the Ukrainian war effort. As a matter of fact, Ukrainian churches have raised a lot of money to buy things like body armor and even vehicles for the Ukrainian military. So while one might not be happy with some things that Patriarch Kirill has said, a lot of what he's been reported to have said, he actually didn't say. Like, it's often been said that he was promising that anyone who died fighting Ukraine would go straight to heaven, and he didn't say that. I have an article on the subject for anyone who's interested. But what he was saying is that, if you offer yourself as a sacrifice out of a sense of obligation to your country and to your family, that it's comparable to the death of a martyr, if you're doing it for those reasons, if you're doing it in a self-sacrificial way. Mm-hmm. But what he said would apply to Ukrainian soldiers fighting for their country and their families too. And he actually began the sermon in question by talking about how it was a fratricidal war, and we pray that it ends.
Right.
But even still, say whatever you want about Patriarch Kirill, Metropolitan Onufry has declared, not just him, but the bishops of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church have declared themselves to be independent, and they're not taking any direction from Moscow. Mm-hmm. And so what Russia does, or what the Moscow Patriarchate does, really doesn't tell you anything about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
Right. And UOC. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if you think Putin's the devil and that the Russians are eating Ukrainian children over, barbecue bonfires or whatever, that's not the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Mm-hmm. when we made the the effort in D.C., one of the things that we made clear to our own people before they went and talked to the various members of Congress is that we are not asking that funding be cut to Ukraine. We're not asking that arms shipments be stopped. We're simply asking that a government that we're funding and arming stop persecuting innocent people. And that really ought to be an uncontroversial thing. That ought to be something that everyone can agree with. And if you think about World War II, the Vatican was right in the middle of Mussolini's Italy, and they had a concordat with Hitler. And so if the United States government had taken the view that the Ukrainian government is taking, we would have said, well, we're going to ban the Roman Catholic Church, and everybody has to move over to the old Catholic Church because they're independent of the Vatican. So we want you all to become old Catholics. Well, it would have been comparable, except the Roman Catholic Church is a much smaller percentage of the population than the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So it's even more ridiculous that they would do it in Ukraine. But in the United States, even though we actually put Japanese citizens in concentration camps, we made quite a bit of newsreel footage about how loyal they were and all the men who volunteered to go fight for the United States, and not to mention Germans and Italians. So we tried to send the message to everyone: we're all Americans, we're all united in this effort to fight for our country. But what Ukraine is doing is really self-defeating, because they're dividing their country at a time when they should be uniting them. And all these men who are baptized in the same church that Metropolitan Onufri is the head of, fighting on the front, there's got to be at least a few of them that have had reason to think, why am I fighting for a country that's beating up my grandma because she wants to go to church? Because that's literally what they're doing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And there are Ukrainian soldiers that have made videos to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not helping themselves, and they're certainly not helping their standing in the international community. But then these Ukrainian activists, usually people who are on the payroll of the United States, either directly or indirectly, say, well, see, you're discrediting the Ukrainian government by pointing out that they're doing these things. Of course, they usually just deny that these things are happening, even though they actually passed a law 3894, where they banned the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Mm-hmm. And they've been implementing it. It's a matter of official policy. It's not, we're not talking about a conspiracy theory. We're not talking about what may or may not have happened in Fort Huachuca or something like that. We're talking about something that is on the books. There's video of these government officials talking about implementing these things. There are court cases and trials. There are bishops in prison. Metropolitan Arseni has been in pretrial detention for nearly 2 years, mm-hmm. despite that he has a serious heart condition, and he's been, for the most part, denied proper medical treatment, and hasn't had his day in court yet. And he's accused of divulging military secrets because in a sermon he complained about police checkpoints preventing people from coming to church. He didn't even say where these checkpoints were, and these were not military checkpoints, they were police checkpoints. And so the law doesn't even apply to those. And so these are all things that are not secret. And so they're shooting themselves in the foot and reloading and shooting themselves in the other foot. And if they don't like people like us pointing out what they're doing, there's a very simple solution. And they could shut our mouths tomorrow if they just stop doing those things. All they got to do is stop persecuting innocent people, mm-hmm. and then I won't have anything else to say about it.
That's right.
Because we all have our opinions about things. I have my opinions, but I don't talk about who's right or wrong in terms of the politics or the war. Because I have if you just talk about the Ukrainians in my parish, not the Russians, not the various other ethnic groups or the Americans in my parish, just the Ukrainians in my parish, I have people who are on both sides of the issue. I have someone in my parish that's from Donetsk, and I can assure you that their opinion about what Russia's doing is very different than some of my other parishioners who support Metropolitan Onufriy, of course, but they don't appreciate being invaded. Well, you know what? Nobody likes being invaded. When the Union invaded the South, there were a lot of pro-Union Southerners at the beginning of the war. As a matter of fact, like Virginia voted against seceding initially. It was only when Lincoln called for 75,000 troops to invade the states that did secede that Virginia changed its mind and said, okay, this is not constitutional. And he did this without Congress, mind you. This is not constitutional, and so we're seceding now. But pro-Union sentiment was huge. But when you're on the receiving end of an invasion, that has a way of uniting people
Yes.
against the invader. And so lots of people became staunch Confederates that were very adamantly pro-Union. Jubal Early, who's like considered to be the father of the so-called lost cause myth, he was adamantly pro-Union and was against secession. He used every means he had to try to defeat secession in Virginia because he was such a staunch Unionist at the beginning of the war. Well, in Ukraine, I'm sure people had all kinds of different opinions about Russia before the war, but it doesn't surprise me that people who are on the receiving end of invasion are largely not in favor of that.
Right.
But there are different opinions in Ukraine even still, and because I have to pastor all these people, and I have to love them, and I don't want them to think that I am taking sides against their families. I keep my opinions about the war private. I'm not getting up on Sunday and talking about who's right or who's wrong.
Right.
But the war, I will say the war should stop. And since I'm an American citizen, I'll say the American government shouldn't have done what they did to create the situation where the war was likely.
Yes.
And they also should not be doing the things they've been doing to try to divide my church. That's the biggest issue for me.
So let me touch on a few things here. So just for the people in the audience, basically what's going on is the United States and other countries in the West are funding the Ukrainian versus the Russian war. We just saw, this is something we haven't discussed yet, but we just saw Boris Johnson send billions of dollars to Zelensky to continue the war effort. We saw, I believe it was France match the funding there as well. Boris Johnson, they had sold one of the UK's football teams in order to send this money over to Zelensky. So they don't have any interest in, the Ukrainians don't have any interest in stopping the war anytime soon. They're making a lot of money. This just happened this last month. But what had happened recently, as far as the Orthodox Church goes, is there was for those that are watching, I'm sure I know you're aware of this because you were involved, Father John. But there was a delegation sent to DC to basically talk about the situation of the Christian persecution going on in Ukraine, the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the UOC. There are clergy that are imprisoned, as we were just saying. There's bishops that are imprisoned, churches that are being desecrated. Ukrainian forces are going in and they are destroying Orthodox churches in Ukraine and using them as staging grounds. All of these things have been admitted by people who are basically getting paid to push this conflict and have it continue to go on because they're making money off of it. They're making billions of dollars. This just happened a month ago. Basically, Zelensky got $8 billion just from two grants from two nations. That's not to say how much money they're making in assets, military assets, weapons, vehicles, so on and so forth. So they really don't have any motivation outside of maybe if there was going to be some kind of a push from the U.S. or so on and so forth to end the conflict. But what we're focused on right now is the persecution of Christians, which should concern everybody. But what happened was when the delegation was sent to D.C., there was a huge response from people online, some of the people you said probably on the payroll making money from the conflict. But this is some of the statements that they made. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So this is footage from the delegation that was sent to DC. You might notice a couple of people in here. This is Father Chris, who's been on my show a couple of times. He was there at DC. See, they're waving. Hi, how's it going?
Слава Україні!
Nice, friendly walk by or whatever. But they basically accused everybody here of being like a KGB Kremlin asset, which is ridiculous. Father Chris is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. He does Subnautica Let's Plays. He does RimWorld Let's Plays. I mean, he's, a very nice guy. Definitely not a KGB asset.
And a military veteran,
secret.
by the way.
Yes. He's awesome. But this is what Katerina says. As a religious person, this makes me very sad. Russian Orthodox priests from other countries operating under the Russian Patriarchate have recently been lobbying U.S. Congress. They're trying to convince people that Ukrainians themselves are to blame for Russia's war. Under Stalin, Russia wiped out, yada, yada. This church is under KGB control, so on and so forth. So you get the point. So
and notice they said priests from other countries, and every priest in that shot was born in the United States.
Correct.
And Father Christopher is not even Russian ethnically.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a completely ridiculous claim. But what was interesting was what was found out just after that. The UOJ reported that lady's boss was caught on film. Basically, this was a leaked conversation, basically saying something to the tune of, we need to be careful what we're pushing online, what we're posting online, because some of us are uploading pictures of Ukrainian forces using Orthodox churches as staging grounds. And he also makes another admission that Ukrainian forces destroyed a lot of the Orthodox churches in Ukraine. Let's give that a listen. This is from the UOJ. This is from the UOJ. This is only about 30 seconds. I'll let this play.
So we have to be careful with the images that we use, because a lot of the Russian Orthodox churches in Ukraine, the UFC churches in Ukraine that were destroyed, were destroyed by Ukrainian forces, and would use them as staging areas. That's very not good.
So it's like, we got to be careful with our optics online, because we kind of destroyed a lot of these Orthodox churches. Maybe it's not best if we take a bunch of like gangster photos standing on top of the Orthodox churches we desecrated and destroyed. That's not a good look. But that was that lady's boss. So it's no surprise when we have all of these kind of Ukrainian bot accounts spreading a bunch of lies on social media, that they then have a meeting saying, hey, we really got to be careful about optics. What else are they saying in these meetings? Well, let's go ahead and try to slander these priests as some kind of KGB operatives. We're going to say that they are some kind of Russian asset, so on and so forth. We'll do the whole Russia scare thing again, but this time targeting Orthodox Christians that are American citizens. Is absolutely absurd.